When she pretends not to care, most men take it personally. They feel rejected, confused, or even angry. But the truth is, her coldness often isn't about indifference. It's a shield, a wall she builds to protect her emotions or to test yours. Women, consciously or not, sometimes use emotional distance as a way to see if your confidence depends on their attention. And this is where most men fail. They react, they chase, they overthink. But a Stoic man understands that emotional control is his true power. He doesn't let temporary shifts in someone else's attitude dictate his sense of worth. When you encounter this behavior, you must remind yourself that you are not here to solve her emotional puzzles. You are here to understand, to observe, and to remain grounded in who you are. Her pretending not to care is often a way of saying, "I want to see how much power I hold over you." If you take the bait, if you try too hard to prove that you care, you hand her that power. The Stoic approach is simple yet profound. Never let someone else's emotions determine your reaction. Stay calm, stay centered, and remember that real connection doesn't need performance. It needs patience. The woman who pretends not to care is often conflicted inside. Her silence may hide disappointment, her distance may mask fear, and her indifference may be a test of your emotional maturity. But you cannot fix that by being overly available or desperate for her validation. You fix it by mastering your own emotions. You become the man who doesn't panic in confusion, who doesn't crumble under pressure, who doesn't trade his peace for attention. The moment she realizes that her coldness cannot control you, she begins to question her behavior. She begins to respect the strength that remains unshaken. Stoicism teaches that we can't control how others feel, but we can control how we respond. If she withdraws, you let her. If she pretends not to care, you don't force her to. You allow her the space to process her emotions without losing your composure. Because when you maintain calmness in the storm, you show her something rare, emotional independence. And that independence is magnetic. It creates a quiet strength that speaks louder than any words could. When you understand that her indifference doesn't define your value, you free yourself from emotional dependency. You begin to realize that peace of mind is worth more than constant validation. You stop reacting and start observing. You stop explaining yourself and start embodying confidence. And slowly, the power dynamic shifts. Not because you tried to change her, but because you refused to change yourself for her approval. The Stoic man knows that her pretending not to care is just a moment, not a truth. He doesn't fight to be seen. He simply stands tall and lets his silence reveal his strength. Only when you no longer need her to care will she truly begin to. When she pretends not to care, the worst mistake a man can make is to chase validation through her silence. This is where many lose their power. They start over-explaining, over-texting, or over-analyzing every little thing she does. But the truth is, when a woman pulls away emotionally, the best response is not to pull harder, it's to pull back too. Distance creates perspective, and perspective creates clarity. When you match her silence with peace instead of panic, you show her that your self-worth doesn't crumble when her attention fades. You show her that your world doesn't revolve around her response. That's when curiosity awakens in her mind, because emotional control is far more attractive than emotional neediness. A Stoic man doesn't try to convince anyone of his value. He lets his actions, his composure, and his consistency speak for him. When she pretends not to care, you must realize that this is often a subconscious test. She wants to see if you'll lose your sense of identity just to win her back. She wants to see if your emotions will overpower your logic. But a man who understands Stoicism knows that control of the self is control of the situation. You don't need to prove anything to her. Your restraint does it for you. You respond not with words, but with absence, the kind that makes her feel your energy without you even being there. When you stop reacting, something powerful happens. She begins to question her own indifference. The human mind is wired to value what seems scarce and to chase what doesn't chase back. By remaining grounded, calm, and emotionally neutral, you give her the rare experience of not being the center of someone's emotional storm. That's unsettling in a world where attention is easily given and rarely earned. She starts wondering why you didn't fight for her attention. She replays your silence, trying to find meaning in it. And that's the beauty of Stoic detachment. It speaks without speaking. However, emotional detachment doesn't mean you stop caring. It means you stop reacting. You can still value her, still have affection, but you refuse to let her emotional games disrupt your inner balance. When she senses that, she feels the shift of power. You are no longer emotionally predictable. You've become a mystery again. And mystery is magnetic. The woman who once pretended not to care now finds herself wondering if you still do. That confusion triggers reflection, and reflection often leads to regret. In Stoic philosophy, strength isn't loud, it's silent. The more you control your impulses, the more control you gain over your environment. By maintaining this silence, you teach her something profound, that your peace cannot be bought with attention or broken by indifference. You are calm because you choose to be, not because she allows it. When you stop reacting to her coldness, you stop feeding the cycle. You reclaim your dignity, your energy, and your control. And in doing so, you become exactly what she didn't expect, unavailable to her games, yet unforgettable to her mind. When she pretends not to care, one of the most powerful things you can do is to focus entirely on self-improvement instead of chasing her attention. This is where most men go wrong. They make her the center of their thoughts, their energy, and even their purpose. They start living reactively, trying to decode her behavior instead of mastering their own. But the Stoic way teaches a different lesson: control what you can control, and that begins with yourself. When she pulls away, use that silence as fuel to build your strength, your discipline, and your identity. Because nothing captures attention more powerfully than a man who evolves in her absence. When you invest your energy into becoming a better version of yourself, you shift the balance of power. You stop asking, "Why isn't she giving me attention?" and start asking, "Why was I seeking it in the first place?" That question alone transforms everything. You begin to realize that your worth isn't dependent on her approval. It's something that radiates from within. The gym, your goals, your focus, your passion, these things become your response. Every hour you spend improving yourself is a message she can't ignore. Because transformation is the loudest silence there is. Women are deeply attuned to change. They may not show it, but they notice when your energy shifts. When you stop chasing, stop explaining, and start rising, they feel it even from afar. The man who was once emotionally predictable now becomes intriguing, disciplined, and purposeful. You begin to stand for something more than her validation. You stand for your own evolution. And that's when the tables turn. The same woman who distanced herself begins to wonder what caused your calm, what ignited your confidence, what brought back your focus. She becomes curious about the man who no longer needs her to feel complete. Self-improvement isn't about revenge or making her jealous. It's about returning to your natural state of power, the one that existed before attachment blurred your clarity. When you operate from strength rather than need, your energy changes completely. You walk differently, you speak with more certainty, and your presence carries weight. That shift doesn't just affect her, it affects how the world responds to you. Suddenly, you're not trying to impress anyone. People feel drawn to you because you're in control of yourself. That's what true confidence is, not seeking control over others, but mastery over your own mind. And here's the truth. When a woman sees a man transform through silence, not through words, it unsettles her. She starts realizing that she lost someone who didn't need her to find happiness. That realization lingers, it grows, and it often brings her back. Because in a world where everyone seeks attention, the one who chooses growth over validation becomes unforgettable. In the end, your greatest power isn't in proving your worth to her. It's in becoming so grounded, so focused, and so complete that her indifference no longer defines you. That is when she truly begins to care again, and more importantly, when you finally don't need her to. When she pretends not to care, one of the biggest mistakes a man can make is trying to prove that he does. He over-explains, over-texts, or tries to win her attention with reassurance and validation. But the truth is, every attempt to prove your worth only makes her believe you doubt it yourself. The Stoic path teaches the opposite. Strength is quiet, presence is powerful, and words mean little without calm conviction behind them. When she acts indifferent, your power lies in maintaining your composure, because indifference loses its impact against a man who isn't moved by it. Her pretending not to care is not a wall, it's a test. It's her way of seeing if your emotions can be manipulated. She wants to know if your confidence was real or just a performance that crumbles when faced with distance. When you meet that act with unshakable calm, you show her something rare, a man whose peace cannot be taken away. Most men react. They argue, chase, or seek closure. But the man grounded in Stoicism understands that true strength is restraint. He doesn't react impulsively to emotion. He observes it, lets it pass, and responds only when it aligns with his values. You have to understand that when a woman pretends not to care, she's not always detached. Often, it's her way of protecting her ego or maintaining power in the interaction. But when you refuse to engage in emotional tug-of-war, the game ends. You stop feeding it. The silence becomes louder than any argument, and your stillness becomes a mirror to her confusion. Because when you stop responding to her indifference, she's forced to confront her own. She starts asking herself why she expected you to react, why she wanted your attention so badly if you supposedly didn't care. That's the paradox. Your composure creates curiosity. The Stoic approach doesn't mean being cold or emotionless. It means being centered. It's about not allowing anyone else's behavior to dictate your state of mind. You can acknowledge her distance without resenting it. You can see through her pretense without trying to fix it. You can remain kind but detached, calm but not complacent. This emotional balance is what most people never master, and it's what makes you stand out. Because while she's trying to pull you off balance, you're quietly demonstrating that you don't lose yourself over temporary emotions. Your silence and self-control are not weakness, they are proof of inner mastery. They communicate something far more powerful than words ever could, that you value peace over chaos and self-respect over approval. When she sees that, her indifference begins to crack. The man who doesn't fight for validation becomes the man she can't stop thinking about. Because deep down, every woman respects a man who doesn't need her to stay centered. And that's the essence of Stoic strength. Not reacting to what you can't control, but mastering how you carry yourself in the storm. When you embody that, you no longer chase her care. She finds herself drawn to yours. When she pretends not to care, the Stoic man doesn't respond with frustration or overcompensation. He responds with presence and purpose. He understands that chasing attention is the behavior of someone who has forgotten his own value. Instead, he shifts his focus inward, back toward his own life, his goals, and his inner discipline. This is the point where you stop asking, "Why doesn't she care?" and start asking, "Why does her reaction matter so much to me?" That question changes everything, because it forces you to reclaim control over your emotional state. You begin to realize that the real strength isn't in trying to win her affection, but in mastering your attachment to it. When you stop seeking validation from her, you begin to re-establish your own emotional authority. That shift is magnetic, even if she doesn't acknowledge it. People, especially women, can sense when a man's energy is centered on his mission instead of on their approval. The moment you stop trying to convince her of your worth and simply live it, the dynamic changes. You become unpredictable, and that unpredictability is powerful. The man who no longer reacts, who no longer begs for connection, who simply continues his path, he becomes the one she can't easily forget. Because his peace isn't borrowed, it's built. Every time she pretends not to care, it's an opportunity for you to practice self-mastery. Instead of taking her distance personally, you can see it as a mirror reflecting your own need for validation. The Stoic man doesn't deny emotion. He observes it, understands it, and uses it to strengthen himself. You learn to remain calm even when uncertainty fills the silence. You learn that your self-worth doesn't fluctuate based on someone else's attention or lack of it. This mindset doesn't just make you stronger, it makes you free. And that freedom is something most people will never achieve, because they remain prisoners of their emotional reactions. Ironically, when you pull back your energy and focus on yourself, that's when she begins to notice. Not because you tried to make her miss you, but because she feels the absence of your attention. People often realize the value of your presence only when they can no longer control it. And when she sees that you're no longer seeking validation, it triggers something deeper. A sense of loss, even if she won't admit it. She may not express it openly, but it lingers in her mind, the thought that she once had your focus, and now she doesn't. That quiet void speaks louder than any confrontation could. By responding to her indifference with inner peace, you remind her, and yourself, that power doesn't come from control over others, but from mastery over self. The moment you stop needing her to care is the moment she begins to. Because nothing draws attention like calm confidence, and nothing earns respect like self-sufficiency. True strength is silent, and that silence will always echo louder than desperation. When she pretends not to care, the final and most powerful move you can make is to remain unshaken, to respond not with emotion, but with quiet certainty. This isn't about playing games or trying to manipulate her attention. It's about embodying a state of mind that says, I am complete with, or without your validation. A Stoic man understands that her indifference is not a reflection of his worth, it's simply a test of his composure. When she distances herself, when her tone becomes colder, when her replies grow shorter, most men panic. They chase, they over-explain, they try to fix what isn't theirs to fix. But the Stoic man pauses. He lets her silence speak, and in doing so, he shows that he is not afraid of losing someone who isn't choosing him. That calm reaction is what separates emotional dependence from true strength. Because every time you choose not to react, you reclaim power from the situation. You no longer let her actions dictate your peace. Instead, you let your peace dictate your actions. You stop texting her first. You stop checking her social media. You stop waiting for her to notice that you're gone. And when you do that, something profound happens. You start noticing yourself again. You rediscover the goals, passions, and priorities that once defined you before her attention became your validation. That's the beauty of indifference. It reminds you who you were before you started seeking approval. Her pretending not to care becomes irrelevant because you're too focused on growth. You're improving your body, sharpening your mind, and deepening your purpose. You no longer measure success by how much she gives you, but by how much discipline you've built in your silence. And here's the truth. Women notice that kind of transformation even when they act like they don't. They feel it in your energy, in your absence, in the way you no longer orbit around their moods. Suddenly, your detachment becomes attractive, your silence becomes mysterious, and your focus becomes magnetic. It's not because you did it to make her want you. It's because you finally stopped trying to be wanted. And that's the paradox. When you detach from needing her to care, she starts to. When you walk away with peace instead of bitterness, she feels the difference. Because real confidence is not loud, it's still. It's the quiet knowing that your value doesn't depend on her recognition. It's the calm assurance that you will be fine, even if she never comes back. That kind of energy is rare, and that rarity commands respect. So, when she pretends not to care, don't respond with frustration, respond with stillness. When she withdraws, don't chase, observe. When she becomes silent, don't fill the silence, own it. That's how you shift the dynamic. That's how you teach her without words that your attention is earned, not owed. And when she finally realizes what she lost, you'll already be too far ahead to look back.